Welcome to the mbaMission podcast, where every week we discuss different MBA application components and give our expert guidance on everything business school admissions related.
Hi, this is Harold Simansky, Senior MBA Admissions Consultant here at mbaMission, and you're here at the mbaMission podcast with my colleague, Gavriella Semaya. Hi, Gabi.
Hi, Harold. How are you doing?
Good. How's everything with you?
Good. Enjoying the summer so far.
Yeah, me as well. Though maybe when people listen to this, it'll be winter. And
Fair point.
We can at least remind them summer.
Not exactly beach listening.
Yeah, but that's true. That's very, very true. On that note, I actually want to talk to you about something that people don't really pay much attention to and is surprisingly important, and that's the short answer part of the applications. So honestly, for a long time, I didn't pay much attention to them, and at some point I learned just how important they are. So, Gabi,
I think I underestimated them when I was applying, certainly. Yes. Now I know better.
Yeah, no question about it. And Gabi, I know you have some thoughts about this, and I would love to hear just how you approach the short answers now.
Yeah.
Just what's your overall strategy around them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first point that you mentioned is the most critical. I think people tend to leave this to the last minute. They think it's the same as kind of filling out the form, entering your basic biographical information, but it's really not. I think of it as an integral part of the application, and to me, the whole application is a puzzle. And so, it's not just what stories are you going to tell, but where are you going to make the most of them? Where are you going to maximize this bit of information? And so the short answer is, I think another kind of default assumption is that you can just kind of copy your resume over, right? Because they're asking you to describe your job, they're asking you to describe your extracurriculars, but they already have that information. And so what new can you tell them in the short answers? That's kind of the fundamental approach.
Yep, that makes sense. And I guess my question is, what new can you tell them in answers?
Fair question. So, I think if the resume is just kind of the highlight reel of here's the accomplishment, right? The job description is a little bit more around what you do day to day, but, you want to make it as interesting as possible. So, you could mention something like, prepare financial models as needed, but focus on, again, try to focus on the impact more, I think, particularly when you're describing these different aspects of your job. You have limited space. You've got 200 characters or something like that. There is an element of picking and choosing, right? You don't have to include every responsibility under the sun, everything you've ever done. So what are the biggest impact items and how? This is kind of where you talk about the how a little bit, right? So if you're leading meetings regularly with stakeholders, that's not necessarily something you would put on the resume, but it is something you could include here to showcase a little bit more of the sort of the under the hood aspect of it.
No, that makes sense. One thing that we always talk about with the resume is this notion of impact. Mm-hmm. I've always felt this tension in terms of, well, you sort of have to tell them what you're doing, and a lot of things impact, particularly for analysts. So maybe early in their career just isn't so clear. How do you approach that? How do you even think about what impact looks like when you're only...
Yeah, there's not always a linear, connection between your work and a result, especially if you're earlier in your career, right? You're more of a contributor. But I try to think about how it influenced the bigger picture. So you can say things like contributing to, a follow-on contract with the client, or supported a work stream. But wherever possible, I try to think about the result, if not on the end kind of deliverable, then on your team, right? What kind of contributions were you providing there? Were you ideating different things? Were you, even if you're not necessarily driving that meeting, were you a part of the brainstorming session? So, it's a little bit trickier when you're earlier on. And I think that speaks to one of the reasons why applying when you've got a few more years under your belt is beneficial. You have more to speak to, both in the application and when you're at business school, and, you have more to kind of offer in terms of your insights. But yeah, it's definitely tricky. I think you still have to have that same lens. You can also focus on the complexity of what you're doing and the difficulty. If there's a high bar as an analyst to what you're doing, there's still value in that, right? Even if you can't necessarily, directly show impact.
Yep. You and I will probably over the course of any season work with 1, 5, 10, whatever it is, McKinsey, Bain, BCG.
Yes.
I mean, probably the biggest group of people who apply to business school.
Yeah.
In the past, how have you seen one distinguish themselves from another?
I think what I try to do is focus less on the things that any, associate consultant, early stage consultant would do. So everybody's leading a work stream at some point, right? But what in that work stream is distinct? And so I usually frame it in terms of projects, and think about the context of the project. What was the ultimate goal and what were you contributing in that sense? So it's a little bit, focused less on I prepared the reports and so on, and more about, the strategy that you might have brought forth, or if you were, driving client relationships, if you're client facing in any way. So it's always about also the, kind of the breadth of your experience. If you're a consultant and you're working on multiple projects, show that, right? So think about, if you have to pick out of your 8 projects and you're showcasing, you're selecting a few on the resume, think about those that either really speak to your goal if you're moving in a particular direction, or that speak to kind of the diversity of your experience in that sense. So if you've been across industries or across functions, highlight that.
Yep. How important, and I have my own thoughts about this in terms of, we will frequently have clients who say, "Oh, I've worked on the biggest M&A deal of all time."
Yes.
Yeah. Or I've really just managed an analyst. I guess I'll get to sort of my
Yeah.
thoughts, which is, yes, really impressive transactions are meaningful, particularly if the admissions committee member has heard about them. At the same point, there's this expectation that the bigger the transaction, the smaller your role. So,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
And I think admissions committees see through that, right? They're not, they might not be experts in the field. They might not have, finance experience themselves, but they've seen enough of these to understand that if you're a second year, analyst, odds are you're not the person driving the deal, right? And so I think it reflects more poorly to insinuate that you are than to talk about your contributions or maybe what you learned from it, right? I think those are that's where the value is okay, this was high stakes, but let's not, have any illusions about your role there. And there's nothing negative about that, right? No one's expecting a second year analyst to be the one, driving this deal.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I'll tell you, we can play this little game here in terms of things that our clients have said on their resumes, or before they work with us, things that our clients have said on their resumes or in the short answers that just make no sense at all. It's the old, again, largest merger of all time.
Mm-hmm.
They were client facing, and they're the ones who actually put the two.
Right. I signed on the dotted line. It's my name on the contract. Totally.
Exactly right. So as you think about sort of more mundane things, or an analyst does, how do you even phrase something like that? How do you even, consider what's important and what isn't?
Well, the first thing is to get at least between myself and the client, what's the reality here? I want to know what the reality is, because we can build from that rather than trying to start from kind of an impressionist version of what you've done. And so look at the modeling. If it's a small piece of the project, for example, zero in on that. I'd rather have more information about what you did and how you impacted the piece that you were responsible for than just know that you participated, broadly speaking, in this transaction.
Right. No, that makes sense. Let's talk.
I don't think I answered your question about rephrasing specifically.
Yeah. I think so. In short answers are frequently career goals as well, short-term and long-term goal. When you're first talking to a client about what that goal is, how should they even consider it? What should they think about when they have only 50 characters to share, or 100 characters to share what those goals might be?
So again, for me at least, I start with more. I always want to start with more information so that you can distill it to the most impactful statement, the essence of what it is, right? You don't need every detail to communicate, what you want to do. And so, if you're thinking about Columbia's, you have 50 characters, they're not expecting an elaborate statement. They want to understand the function in the industry. When you have a little bit more room, I try to layer on, sort of the so what piece of it. Like, to what end do you want to be in financial services or consulting or et cetera? So that's kind of how I break it down initially. And then I think, if I remove any of this information, does it still make sense?
Right.
If you've only got limited characters, everything in there has to add value to the statement.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I guess this notion here of, okay, short answers in the application is different from what's in the resume. And if I understand correctly, it's almost like the resume is the facts or the black and white. Short answers is the color. Is that what we're getting at here?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, especially with schools like HBS, where they ask you to describe a key accomplishment and key challenge, right? Now, it's not so much, that you led this work stream, that's the accomplishment, right? It's that you did so when a senior manager was out on leave and you had to step up into this role that was more senior than expected for you, or you did so, you solved a problem with limited information. You highlight the what makes this noteworthy.
Yes.
It's not so much the what as the, why is this, interesting? So I think of it, you have to go a little bit more surface, below the surface rather.
No, that makes sense. Great. Any final thoughts or piece of advice that you would say to somebody who comes to you and say, hey, what should I do with the short answers?
The first thing, I do it last typically because I want to know what else I've said elsewhere in the application and I want to make sure it's coherent. But then I also think about, again, like what might we not have spoken about here? And so, or if there's a particular trait that we're trying to emphasize, use it as a tool. Don't think of it as an afterthought that, it's when you think about how the admissions committees are reading it, it comes before the essays in the application. Right. And so they're formulating opinions about you as they read it. And I want them to read through these short answers and think, I want to know more about this person, or this is really interesting, not just, okay, great, this is what they've done. You got to get a little bit under the hood to make someone interesting.
No, that makes sense, actually. And that's always what we try to do here is make people interesting.
Yes, I think that's actually a very good way of summarizing our jobs.
Right. No, I think that's right. And I also tell people everyone's interesting. We just have to get to know you a little.
Very true. Very true.
Definitely. Great, Dan. Well, Gabi, thank you very much for joining me today. And I look forward to
absolutely. My pleasure.
mbaMission podcast.
Thanks for listening to the mbaMission podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts so you don't miss an episode. We wish you the best of luck with your MBA applications and look forward to helping you on your journey to business school.